The email from the European Research Council arrived at exactly 8:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know the precise time because I had been staring at my inbox since 6 a.m., sitting at the edge of my unmade bed with a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. The subject line read, Grant Allocation Decision, ERC, Advanced Grant 2026. I opened it. The document was formal, embossed with the digital crest of the European Union's highest scientific funding body. It announced that a €2 million grant had been awarded to Dr. Marcus Vance for a groundbreaking proposal in computational synthetic biology. I downloaded the attached abstract that had won the award. It was a brilliant, elegant piece of scientific literature detailing a novel enzymatic pathway that could theoretically degrade industrial microplastics at an unprecedented metabolic rate. It was a flawless proposal. I knew it was flawless because I had spent 3 years of my life writing every single word of it, coding every single data model and running every single assay, while Dr. Marcus Vance was at the country club perfecting his golf swing. I read his name at the top of the page, Principal Investigator, Dr. Marcus Vance. My name was nowhere on the document, not as a co-investigator, not as a lead researcher, not even as a footnote. I did not throw my laptop against the wall. I did not burst into tears of betrayed exhaustion. I simply closed the PDF, took a sip of my terrible coffee, and felt the absolute icy calm of a woman who had seen the knife coming from a mile away and had already decided to let him stab a live wire. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. If you have ever worked in a system designed to crush you, only to watch someone above you claim your brilliance as their own, this one is for you. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. Now, let me take you back to before the email arrived. I need to explain the feudal system of modern academia because to understand the audacity of the theft, you must first understand the invisible hierarchy that made him believe he could get away with it. My name is Harper. I am 29 years old. For the last 5 years, I have been a PhD candidate at a prestigious research university in Boston, specializing in synthetic biology. To the outside world, science looks like a noble pursuit of truth. It looks like white coats, sterile laboratories, and brilliant minds collaborating for the betterment of humanity. The reality is much darker. Academia is a pyramid scheme built on the unpaid, uncredited labor of graduate students. We are the ones who arrive at the lab at 4 a.m. to check cell cultures. We are the ones who spend holidays staring at Excel sheets until our vision blurs. We do the actual, grueling manual labor of discovery. But we do not own the discoveries. The discoveries belong to the principal investigator, the PI. My PI was Dr. Marcus Vance. Marcus was 54 years old. He had a shock of silver hair, a blindingly white smile, and the kind of effortless, booming charisma that commanded attention at international conferences. He wore tailored tweed jackets and spoke in grand, sweeping metaphors about the future of the biosphere. But Marcus had a secret, one that every graduate student in his lab learned within their first 6 months. Marcus hadn't done an actual day of bench science in 15 years. He was not a scientist anymore. He was a politician. His entire job was to travel, shake hands, give TED Talks, and secure funding. He relied entirely on his PhD students and postdocs to generate the actual data that kept his laboratory afloat. When I joined his lab, I was 24, hungry, and dangerously naive. I wanted to change the world. I pitched Marcus an idea that bordered on science fiction, a computationally designed enzyme built from scratch using artificial intelligence that could eat polyethylene, the most common plastic in the world, and convert it into harmless, biodegradable byproducts. Marcus listened to my pitch with a polite, patronizing smile. He told me it was ambitious, which is academic code for impossible. He told me I could pursue it as a side project, but my primary focus needed to be on his existing, safer research into agricultural soil microbes. For the next 3 years, I worked 2 jobs. By day, I ran the tedious, repetitive assays for Marcus's soil microbe grants, but at night, from 8 p.m. until 2 a.m., I worked on my enzyme. I lived in a state of permanent exhaustion. My social life evaporated. My apartment became nothing more than a place to sleep and shower. My entire existence was reduced to the hum of the mass spectrometer, the sterile smell of ethanol, and the glow of my computer screen as I ran thousands of digital simulations, trying to find the exact amino acid sequence that would unlock the plastic eating pathway. Failure in science is not dramatic. It is slow, grinding, and quiet. I failed for 36 months straight. I watched hundreds of cell cultures die. I watched digital models collapse in on themselves. But in the 37th month, something shifted. It was a Thursday night. The lab was completely empty. It was raining outside, the sound tapping gently against the heavy glass windows of the biology building. I was staring at the latest protein folding simulation on my monitor. The algorithm finished compiling. The enzyme model locked into place. The binding affinity to the polyethylene molecule wasn't just good, it was perfect. The metabolic pathway lit up green across my screen. I had done it. I had designed a biological machine that could solve one of the greatest ecological crises on the planet. I sat in the dark lab, my heart hammering in my chest, looking at the data. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the kind of breakthrough that defined careers. This was a Nature or Science cover story. This was the foundation of a biotechnology empire. The next morning, I walked into Marcus's office. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, practicing his putting on a small strip of artificial turf he kept by the window. "Harper," he said, not looking up from his golf ball, "I need the data on the nitrogen fixation assays by tomorrow. The review board is breathing down my neck." "I have the nitrogen data," I said. "But that's not why I'm here. I need to show you something. My side project." I placed a printed 30-page dossier on his desk. It contained the computational models, the synthesized enzyme structures, and the preliminary in vitro degradation results. Marcus sighed, setting down his putter. He picked up the dossier with the weary indulgence of a parent looking at a toddler's finger painting. He opened to the first page. I watched his face. Marcus might not have touched a pipette in 15 years, but he was not stupid. He knew how to read data. I watched his eyes scan the molecular models. I watched his posture change. The casual, relaxed arrogance stiffened into sharp, predatory focus. He flipped to the second page, then the third, reading faster. The silence in the office stretched for 10 agonizing minutes. Finally, he looked up at me. The patronizing smile was entirely gone. "You generated this data?" he asked, his voice low and tight. "I did," I said. "Over the last 3 years. The enzyme is stable. The degradation rate is exponential. It works, Marcus." He looked back down at the dossier. He traced his finger over the degradation curve. I could practically see the gears turning in his head. He wasn't looking at a scientific breakthrough. He was looking at a cover story. He was looking at international prestige. He was looking at a multi-million-euro grant. "This is," he started, then stopped, recalibrating his tone. He leaned back in his leather chair, folding his hands, and smoothly redeployed his charismatic smile. "This is very interesting, Harper. Very promising. It needs a massive amount of refinement, of course, but it's a solid foundation. You've done well." "It's more than promising," I pushed back gently. "It's ready for a full grant proposal. I want to start drafting the paper. I want to be the lead author. In academia, authorship order is everything. The first author is the person who did the actual work. The last author is the POA who runs the lab." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Harper. Drafting a high-impact paper is a political process. You focus on the bench work. Let me handle the strategy. Leave the dossier with me. I'll review it this weekend." I left his office feeling a strange, hollow knot in my stomach. I had expected excitement. I had expected him to shake my hand. Instead, I felt like I had just handed a loaded weapon to a man who didn't know how to shoot, but knew exactly who to point it at. The theft did not happen all at once. Like all great academic betrayals, it was executed through a series of slow, bureaucratic maneuvers designed to look like standard operating procedure. A week later, Marcus announced at the weekly lab meeting that the laboratory would be shifting its primary focus. He unveiled his new direction, the enzymatic degradation of microplastics. He spoke passionately to the room of graduate students about our new mission. He did not mention my 3 years of solitary midnight labor. When I confronted him privately after the meeting, he was perfectly calm. "Harper, science is a team sport," he said, using the voice of a disappointed mentor. "You generated the preliminary data, yes, but to secure the funding required to scale this, we need the full weight of the laboratory behind it. We need my name on it. Funding agencies do not give 2 million euros to a 29-year-old PhD candidate. They give it to me. We are building a narrative. I understand that you need to be the principal investigator on the grant," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I need my name on the proposal as the co-investigator. And I need written confirmation that I am the first author on the foundational paper." Marcus sighed. It was a heavy, theatrical sigh designed to make me feel small and unreasonable. "You are too emotionally attached to the data, Harper," he said. "That's a dangerous flaw in a young scientist. You lack perspective. I am the one who secured the laboratory space. I am the one who paid for the computational software you used. Legally and ethically, the intellectual property belongs to my lab. I will ensure you are listed as a contributing author on the paper. But this is my laboratory, and this will be my grant." A contributing author. He was going to take the defining achievement of my life, the thousands of hours of unpaid labor, the brilliance of my computational design, and relegate me to the middle of a list of 10 names, buried in the footnotes. He was going to use my brain to buy himself a 2 million euro European Research Council grant, and he was going to discard me when he was finished. "I see," I said softly. "I knew you'd understand." He smiled, turning back to his computer, dismissing me completely. "Now, I need you to draft the methodology section for the ERC grant application. I have a meeting with the dean in an hour." I walked out of his office. I walked down the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway of the biology building. I did not cry. I did not storm into the HR department to file a grievance. Filing a grievance against a tenured, highly funded professor as a graduate student is professional suicide. The university protects the people who bring in the money. If I complained, Marcus would simply claim I was a disgruntled, unstable student overstating my contribution. He would fire me from the lab. I would lose my funding. I would lose my PhD. And I would be blacklisted from every major research institution in the country. He had all the institutional power. I had none. But I had something else. I went back to my lab bench. I sat down in front of my computer. I opened the raw data files for the enzymatic pathway, the files that only I truly understood. Marcus was a politician. He knew how to pitch a concept, but he didn't actually understand the mathematics of synthetic biology. He didn't know how the algorithm functioned. He didn't know how the amino acids were sequenced. He was about to submit a highly technical 80-page grant proposal to the most rigorous scientific board in Europe, based entirely on data he could not independently verify. He was trusting me to hand him a flawless, bulletproof application. He was trusting me to do the work and let him take the credit. I opened the core genetic sequence of the enzyme. It was a string of thousands of letters, A, C, T, G, representing the DNA code of the protein. I did not sabotage the science. Sabotaging the science would mean the grant would be rejected, and Marcus would simply blame me for poor lab work. I needed the grant to be perfect. I needed the European Research Council to look at the proposal and to decide it was a work of absolute, undeniable genius. I needed Marcus to win the 2 million euros. I needed him to stand on the highest possible pedestal. Because the higher the pedestal, the more catastrophic the fall. I stared at the code on my screen. And then, deep within the non-coding region of the genetic sequence, a section of the DNA that did not affect the function of the enzyme, but was integral to the mathematical blueprint. I began to type. I was going to give Marcus Vance exactly what he asked for. I was going to give him the keys to the kingdom, but I was going to engrave my name onto the lock in a language he was too arrogant to read. I was going to build the anomaly, To understand how to hide a bomb inside a biological mechanism, you must first understand the language of life itself. DNA is not a mystical force, it is a code. It is a highly organized biological hard drive written in an alphabet of exactly 4 letters: adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine. A, C, T, G. When you synthesize a new enzyme in a laboratory, you are essentially writing a piece of software. You write the genetic sequence, you insert it into a bacterial host, and the bacteria reads the code and manufactures the protein. The European Research Council requires the complete, raw genomic sequence of any synthetic organism to be submitted as supplementary data in the grant application. It is the ultimate proof of work. I was responsible for compiling that supplementary data. Marcus didn't even know how to open the FASTA files that contained the raw genomic text. I sat in the dark laboratory, the soft blue light of my monitor illuminating the endless strings of A's, T's, C's, and G's. I isolated the non-coding region of the plasmid vector, a section of the DNA that the bacteria ignores when building the enzyme. It is the biological equivalent of the blank margins on a piece of paper. Using a standard binary to nucleotide conversion algorithm, which assigns specific codon triplets to the English alphabet, I began to write. I did not write a short message. I wrote a comprehensive, undeniable confession embedded directly into the molecular structure of the invention. Translated from the genetic code, the sequence read, "The enzymatic pathway detailed in this proposal was hypothesized, modeled, and synthesized entirely by Harper Vance between September 2023 and October 2025. Dr. Marcus Vance contributed 0 empirical data, 0 computational architecture, and 0 laboratory hours to this project." But I didn't stop there. A biological watermark is elegant, but to trigger a European grant audit, I needed a mathematical anomaly in the primary statistical models, something that looked like a vital piece of the methodology, but was completely absurd if you actually understood it. I introduced a dummy variable into the kinetic degradation equations. I named the variable coefficient B-R-N-B. It looked like a highly complex algorithmic filtration constant used to account for background thermal noise in the mass spectrometer. In reality, it was just the name of my late childhood golden retriever, Barnaby. The math was structured so that if you removed coefficient B-R-N-B from the model, the entire predictive curve collapsed. The coefficient was foundational to the grant's success, and it was entirely, spectacularly, fake. I compiled the 80-page grant proposal. I attached the massive zip files containing the raw genomic data and the statistical models. On a Friday afternoon, I handed the flash drive to Marcus in his office. He plugged it into his sleek Mac computer. He opened the PDF. He scrolled past the title page, where his name sat proudly at the top as principal investigator, and my name sat buried on page 4 as a laboratory research assistant. He skimmed the executive summary. He did not look at the supplementary data. "Excellent formatting, Harper," Marcus said, leaning back and lacing his fingers together. "The narrative flow is very strong. I'll make a few high-level tweaks to the introduction over the weekend and submit it to the portal on Monday." He didn't make any tweaks to the introduction. I know, because I checked the final submitted file on the university's shared drive. He simply added his electronic signature and sent it to Brussels. The trap was in the mail. Now, I just had to survive the waiting game. The European Research Council takes 6 months to review advanced grant applications. During those 6 months, Marcus's behavior shifted exactly the way my risk models predicted it would. Having secured the golden ticket, the finalized proposal that he believed would define his legacy, he no longer needed the architect. In fact, the architect had become a liability. As long as I was the only person in the lab who understood how to synthesize the plastic-eating enzyme, I held too much leverage. He needed to extract my knowledge, transfer it to someone else, and quietly sideline me. 2 months after the grant was submitted, Marcus hired a new postdoctoral researcher. His name was Dr. Colin Hayes. Colin was 31, aggressively confident, and spoke entirely in the sterile, corporate buzzwords of modern biotechnology. He was a smaller, younger version of Marcus. He was a man who cared more about the aesthetics of science than the actual benchwork. Marcus called me into his office to make the introduction. "Harper, I want you to meet Colin." Marcus beamed, clapping the new postdoc on the shoulder. "Colin is joining us from Stanford. He is going to be taking the lead on the microplastics project moving forward." I sat perfectly still. "Taking the lead?" "Yes," Marcus said, adopting his most paternal, patronizing tone. "You've done a wonderful job setting up the preliminary assays, Harper, but as we prepare for the ERC funding to come through, we need to transition this project into a high-throughput postdoctoral phase. You are still a PhD candidate. I need you to focus on finishing your dissertation on the agricultural soil microbes. That is your core mandate." He was stripping me of my own invention in broad daylight. He was locking me out of the laboratory I had built. "I see," I said. "And what is my role with Colin?" "I need you to spend the next 4 weeks training him," Marcus said smoothly. "Walk him through the computational models, show him the synthesis protocols. Once he is fully up to speed, you can transition back to the soil samples." He wanted me to hand the keys to the thief. Colin offered me a slick, practiced smile. "I'm really looking forward to picking your brain, Harper. Marcus has told me you laid a great foundation for us to build on." For us to build on. I looked at Colin. I looked at Marcus. I did not scream. I did not throw my notebook. I smiled back. "I would be happy to show Colin the protocols," I said. For the next 4 weeks, I trained Colin Hayes. I played the role of the obedient, defeated graduate student flawlessly. I taught him how to run the mass spectrometer. I showed him how to mix the reagents. I walked him through the broad strokes of the computational models. But I did not teach him the math. I showed him which buttons to click on the software interface, but I never explained the underlying architecture of the algorithm. I never explained how the genetic sequence translated to the protein folding. And I certainly never explained the function of coefficient B-R-B. Colin, being exactly the kind of lazy, optics-driven scientist Marcus was, never bothered to ask. He was thrilled to simply follow a step-by-step recipe. He thought he had mastered the science because he knew how to turn on the machine. At the end of the 4 weeks, Marcus formally removed me from the microplastics project. My keycard access to the specialized clean room where the enzymes were synthesized was revoked. I was exiled back to the dreary, repetitive world of agricultural soil testing. I sat at my new bench, running mundane dirt samples, and watched Colin and Marcus parade around the lab, giving tours to visiting faculty, pointing at my machines, and talking about their brilliant vision for the future of planetary ecology. I let them talk. I let them build the pedestal higher and higher. And then, 4 months later, the Tuesday morning arrived. The email from the European Research Council landed in Marcus's inbox, and the notification propagated to the entire lab's mailing list. Grant Allocation Decision. ERC. Advanced Grant 2026. 2 million euros awarded to Dr. Marcus Vance. The biology department erupted. Winning an ERC Advanced Grant is the academic equivalent of winning an Oscar. It guarantees tenure, massive laboratory expansion, and international press coverage. By 3 p.m. that afternoon, Marcus had organized a massive champagne reception in the department's main atrium. The room was packed. The Dean of Sciences was there. The university president had sent a massive floral arrangement. Marcus stood at the front of the room, wearing a tailored navy suit, holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne. "Science is about vision," Marcus boomed, his voice carrying effortlessly over the crowd. When I began conceptualizing this enzymatic pathway 3 years ago, people told me I was chasing a phantom. They told me that engineering a biological solution to the global plastics crisis was a mathematical impossibility. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air, soaking in the admiration of the room. "But in this laboratory, we do not accept the impossible," Marcus continued, pressing a hand to his chest. "We push the boundaries of the biosphere. This 2 million euros grant is not just a victory for me. It is a victory for the tireless pursuit of innovation. I want to thank my incredible new postdoc, Colin, for his stellar work in helping me prepare the final logistical frameworks for this project." He raised his glass. The room erupted into applause. I stood in the very back of the atrium, near the recycling bins. I was holding a plastic cup of lukewarm ginger ale. I watched the dean shake Marcus's hand. I watched Colin beam with unearned pride. I did not clap. I took a sip of my ginger ale, pulled my smartphone out of my pocket, and opened my encrypted email app. I had drafted the email 3 months ago. It was addressed to the Director of Scientific Integrity at the European Research Council in Brussels. The ERC does not operate like an American university. American universities are businesses. Their primary instinct is to protect their star professors and bury scandals to protect their funding streams. The ERC is a government entity funded by the taxpayers of 27 European nations. They are ruthless, hyper-bureaucratic, and possess an absolute zero-tolerance policy for data fraud. If they suspect a principal investigator has falsified data or committed plagiarism, they do not hold a polite internal review. They drop a hammer. My email was brief, highly technical, and completely devoid of emotion. To the Office of Scientific Integrity regarding EREs, Advanced Grant 2026, Ref. Vance-Plast-Zyme-994. I am a researcher formerly associated with the laboratory of Dr. Marcus Vance. I am writing to formally request a technical audit of the supplementary genomic data and statistical modeling submitted in the aforementioned grant proposal. Specifically, I direct your bioinformatics team to analyze the non-coding plasmid vector sequence in FASTA File 3. Please apply a standard binary to ASCII codon translation. Furthermore, I advise your statistical review board to demand that Dr. Vance explain the mathematical derivation and physical function of coefficient B-Rn-B on page 42 of the kinetic degradation models. Dr. Vance is not the author of this data. He does not understand the models he submitted. He has committed gross academic plagiarism to secure EU funding. I have attached the cryptographic keys to the DNA cipher. I did not sign my name. I hit send. I put my phone back into my pocket. I watched Marcus drink his champagne and laugh at a joke the dean made. I watched him live in the absolute shimmering peak of his career. He had exactly 72 hours left at the top of the world. The European Research Council moves with the terrifying efficiency of a bureaucratic predator. On Friday morning, the atmosphere in the biology building was completely normal. I was sitting at my bench, running soil samples. Colin was in the clean room, pretending to look busy. Marcus was in his office, conducting a phone interview with a science journalist from London. At 10:14 a.m., the glass door to Marcus's office slammed shut. It didn't just close. It slammed with the violent, uncontrolled force of a man who has just been struck by lightning. The blinds to his office, which were always kept open to display his dominance to the lab, were frantically yanked down. I stopped pipetting my soil samples. I looked at the drawn blinds, the ambient noise of the laboratory, the hum of the centrifuges, the bubbling of the water baths, suddenly felt incredibly loud. 10 minutes later, Marcus's office door cracked open. He stuck his head out. His face was the color of wet ash. The silver hair that was usually perfectly styled looked disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it in a panic. He looked directly at me. "Harper," he barked, his voice tight and breathless. "My office, now." I capped my test tube. I took off my nitrile gloves, throwing them into the biohazard bin. I walked across the lab, acutely aware of Colin watching me with mild, confused curiosity. I stepped into Marcus's office. He closed the door behind me and locked it. The room was suffocatingly tense. Marcus was gripping the edge of his oak desk so hard his knuckles were white. His laptop was open, the screen displaying an email with the crest of the European Union. "What did you do?" Marcus whispered. He wasn't asking a question. He was making an accusation. "I don't know what you mean, Marcus," I said, keeping my face perfectly blank. "I've been running the agricultural soil protocols exactly as you mandated." Marcus spun the laptop around so I could see the screen. The email was from the ERC Office of Scientific Integrity. It was marked urgent/confidential. I read the text quickly, though I already knew what it said. The ERC had suspended the €2 million grant disbursement effective immediately. They had flagged the proposal for severe data anomalies and potential authorship fraud. But the most devastating part of the email was the final paragraph. Dr. Vance, pursuant to EU grant compliance regulations, you are hereby summoned to a mandatory emergency technical defense. You must participate in a live video conference with our Bioinformatics Review Board on Monday at 0900 Central European Time. During this defense, you will be required to explain the mathematical derivation of coefficient B-R N-B and address the translated text anomaly embedded within the genomic supplementary data. Failure to adequately defend this data will result in the immediate cancellation of the grant, a lifetime ban from ERC funding, and a formal report of academic fraud forwarded to your university administration. I finished reading. I looked up at Marcus. An anomaly in the genomic data, I noted calmly, and a question about the kinetic coefficients. That sounds like a rigorous review. Don't play games with me, Harper, Marcus exploded, slamming his fist onto the desk. They are demanding I defend the math. The math you wrote. What is coefficient B-R-N-B? I've spent the last hour looking through the raw data files and I can't even find the derivation equation. You can't find it because there is no derivation equation, Marcus, I said smoothly, stepping away from the door and moving further into the office. Coefficient B-R-N-B is not a mathematical constant. It is the name of my childhood golden retriever, Barnaby. It is a completely fabricated variable that holds the entire predictive model together. Marcus stared at me. The realization of what I was saying hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back slightly, hitting the edge of his bookshelf. And the genomic data? He whispered, his voice trembling with a terror he could no longer hide. What is the text anomaly they are talking about? I encoded a message into the non-coding region of the plasmid DNA, using a binary to ASCII cipher, I explained, speaking with the clear, unbothered precision of a scientist presenting a poster at a conference. When translated, the DNA sequence explicitly states that I am the sole architect of the project, and that you contributed absolutely nothing. Marcus collapsed into his leather chair. The charismatic, booming professor who had given a victory speech just 3 days ago was entirely gone. He was a hollow shell, staring at a laptop screen that was currently broadcasting his imminent professional execution. You sabotaged the grant, he choked out, grabbing his hair. You sabotaged 2 million euros. You've destroyed the lab. I didn't sabotage the grant, Marcus, I corrected him. The science is flawless. The enzyme works perfectly. The grant was approved because my work is brilliant. I simply ensured that the grant could only be defended by the person who actually did the work. You submitted 80 pages of data you didn't understand and signed your name to it. You sabotaged yourself. Marcus looked up at me. His eyes were wild, desperate, and searching for an exit. He looked at the clock on his wall. It was Friday afternoon. The ERC hearing was on Monday morning. He had less than 72 hours to prepare for a technical defense against Europe's top bioinformaticians. He didn't know the math. He didn't know the cipher. He didn't know how to save his own life. Harper? Marcus pleaded, his voice dropping into a pathetic, whimpering register. Harper, please. You have to help me. You have to write me a defense script. You have to explain the coefficient to me so I can justify it to the board. If I lose this grant, the dean will gut this lab. You'll lose your funding. We'll all be ruined. He was trying to use my own livelihood as a hostage. He still believed he had leverage. I looked at the man sitting behind the oak desk. I thought about the thousands of hours I had spent in the dark, the holidays I had missed, the sheer exhaustion of building a miracle while he perfected his golf swing. I'm sorry, Marcus, I said, my voice as cold as liquid nitrogen. But as you explicitly told me 4 weeks ago, I am no longer part of the microplastics project. I am just a graduate student working on soil microbes. I lack the perspective to handle high-level strategic defenses. I turned toward the door. You can't do this, he screamed, standing up, knocking his putter over. I am your principal investigator. I own this lab. I will fire you. I unlocked the door and placed my hand on the handle. Fire me, I said softly, looking over my shoulder. But I highly recommend you ask Colin to help you prepare for the hearing. After all, you told the entire department that he was taking the lead. I opened the door and walked out of the office, leaving Dr. Marcus Vance to face the terrifying, inescapable reality of Monday morning. The anatomy of a narcissist's panic is a highly predictable linear progression. It moves through 4 distinct stages: denial, rage, bargaining, and finally, absolute groveling terror. I spent my weekend observing this progression in real time, safely curated through the digital screen of my smartphone. Because the European Research Council hearing was scheduled for 900 Central European Time on Monday, which translated to 3 a.m. in Boston, Marcus had exactly 60 hours to solve a biological and mathematical cipher he did not possess the intellectual capacity to understand. He could not ask another faculty member for help without admitting he had stolen the data. He could not ask the university's bioinformatics department, because that would leave an institutional paper trail of his incompetence. His only resources were Colin, the postdoc who cared only about optics, and me. I left the biology building at 5 p.m. on Friday. I turned my phone on silent, went to my apartment, and ordered Thai takeout. The first email arrived at 7:15 p.m. Harper, come back to the lab immediately. This is not a request. It is a directive from your principal investigator. If you do not help me clear up this administrative error with the ERC, I will initiate formal disciplinary proceedings to terminate your PhD candidacy. That was the rage. I ate my noodles and deleted the email. Saturday morning, 9:30 a.m., 13 missed calls. A new email. Harper, let's be reasonable. You are letting your emotions cloud your judgment. I spoke to the dean's office. If we secure this grant, I can guarantee you a fully funded postdoctoral position in my lab. We can share the first authorship on the preliminary paper. Just send me the derivation for coefficient B-R, N-B. We are a team. Don't destroy our work. That was the bargaining. He was offering me a fraction of my own kingdom, assuming I was desperate enough to accept the scraps. I went for a long walk in the public gardens. The autumn air was crisp and perfect. Sunday evening, 11:45 p.m. Just 3 hours before he had to log into the video conference with the Supreme Scientific Tribunal of Europe. Please. Harper, I am begging you, I don't know the math. Colin doesn't know the math. I tried to run the simulations without the coefficient and the model crashed. The ERC board is going to humiliate me. Name your price. I will transfer the grant into your name as Co-P. Once it clears, please call me. Please. That was the terror. I did not reply. I turned off my phone, set my physical alarm clock, and went to sleep. I slept deeply, heavily, and dreamlessly. I did not wake up at 3 a.m. I let Dr. Marcus Vance face the European Research Council entirely alone. I arrived at the biology building at 8:30 a.m. on Monday morning. The atmosphere in the laboratory was unrecognizable. The usual hum of graduate students chatting and centrifuges spinning was entirely absent. The air felt heavy, sterile, and suffocatingly tense. I walked past the glass-walled clean room. Colin Hayes was inside, but he wasn't running assays. He was frantically packing his personal belongings into a cardboard box. He looked up, saw me, and quickly looked away, his face pale with a mixture of fear and profound embarrassment. Colin had realized that his name was attached to the postdoctoral paperwork for a fraudulent grant, and he was currently trying to flee the blast radius before the shockwave hit. I walked to my bench, put on my white coat, and sat down. At 9 a.m., the door to Marcus's office opened. He stepped out. He looked like a man who had aged a decade over the weekend. His expensive tweed jacket was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with deep, dark circles. He walked slowly, unsteadily, toward the center of the lab. He stopped a few feet from my bench. He looked at me. There was no anger left in him. There was only the hollow, vacant stare of a man who has just watched his entire life burn to the ground. They asked me to explain the coefficient, Marcus whispered. His voice was raw, raspy, as if he had been screaming. I did not stop writing in my lab notebook. And what did you tell them, Marcus? I tried to bluff, he said, staring at the floor. I used thermodynamic terminology. I tried to claim it was an ambient thermal filtration constant, The head of the bioinformatics board stopped me mid-sentence. He shared his screen. He showed the entire tribunal the DNA translation. Marcus closed his eyes. A slight tremor shook his hands. He read the message aloud, Harper. Marcus choked out. In front of the entire European Scientific Committee, Dr. Marcus Vance contributed 0 empirical data, 0 computational architecture, and 0 laboratory hours. They asked me if it was true. I couldn't answer. I didn't have the math to prove otherwise. They muted my microphone. They terminated the call. That sounds like a very efficient hearing, I noted. Before Marcus could respond, the heavy double doors of the laboratory swung open. It was the Dean of Sciences, Dr. Harrington. He was accompanied by 2 stern-looking men in dark suits, the university's legal counsel. The dean did not look at the graduate students. He walked directly up to Marcus. Marcus, Dean Harrington said. His voice was an absolute sheet of ice. My office received a formal communication from Brussels 20 minutes ago. The ERC has permanently revoked your grant status and forwarded a dossier of academic misconduct to our provost. You are to hand over your laboratory keys, your keycard, and your university laptop immediately. You are placed on administrative leave, effective this second, pending a full university tribunal. Marcus did not argue. He did not defend himself. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his keys, and handed them to the university lawyer. And Ms. Vance, the dean said, turning his sharp gaze toward me. My office. 15 minutes. Marcus was escorted out of the building. He didn't pack his golf putter. He didn't take his framed awards. He walked down the fluorescent-lit hallway, flanked by lawyers, completely stripped of his empire. 15 minutes later, I walked into the dean's expansive, mahogany-paneled office. Dean Harrington sat behind his desk. The university's lead legal counsel sat next to him. They did not offer me a seat. They intended to intimidate me. They viewed me as a rogue variable that had just embarrassed their institution on a global stage, and they wanted to assert control. Ms. Vance, Dean Harrington began, lacing his fingers together. The university is currently facing an unprecedented public relations and funding crisis. Dr. Vance's actions are inexcusable. However, your decision to circumvent the university's internal grievance protocols and contact the ERC directly was highly irregular and deeply damaging to this institution. Dr. Vance submitted a fraudulent grant, Dean Harrington, I said calmly, remaining standing. I simply provided the funding agency with the necessary data to evaluate it accurately. You embedded a cipher into intellectual property belonging to this university. The lawyer interjected sharply. You intentionally sabotaged a €2 million asset. I smiled. It was a very small, very cold smile. I did not sabotage university property, I corrected him. And I certainly did not embed a cipher into your intellectual property. The lawyer frowned. The genomic sequence was generated in our laboratory. Under your graduate student contract, any intellectual property you develop using university resources, facilities, or software is owned in its entirety by the university. That is entirely correct, I agreed, which is why I did not use university resources to design the enzyme. Both the dean and the lawyer went perfectly still. I ran the bench assays for Dr. Vance's soil microbes in your laboratory, I explained, my voice echoing clinically in the large office. But the computational architecture for the plastic-eating enzyme, the protein folding simulations, the genomic sequencing algorithms, I built those at night, in my own apartment, on my own personal computer, using open-source software that I compiled myself. I did not use a single university license. I did not use the university servers. I maintained a strict, legally documented firewall between my mandatory lab hours and my personal research. The lawyer's face paled. He was a corporate attorney. He understood exactly what that meant. As for the data Dr. Vance submitted to the ERC, I continued, that data contained a mathematically flawed dummy variable, coefficient B-RN-B. It was a fictional construct. Therefore, the intellectual property Dr. Vance attempted to claim on behalf of the university is a mathematically invalid, non-functional model. You own the rights to a broken equation. And the functional model? The dean asked. his voice suddenly very quiet. I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out a heavy, cream-colored folder and set it on the dean's desk. 3 months ago, before Dr. Vance ever saw my dossier, I engaged a private intellectual property firm, I stated. I filed a provisional patent for the functional, uncompromised enzymatic pathway under my own name through a private LLC I registered in Delaware. I own the absolute, unencumbered rights to the enzyme. The lawyer pulled the folder toward him. He opened it. He saw the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office filing receipts. He saw my name as the sole inventor. He saw the LLC registration. You planned this from the very beginning, the dean whispered, staring at me as if he were looking at a ghost. I protected my work from a system designed to steal it, I said. Dr. Vance told me science is a team sport, but he only wanted me on the team so he could carry the trophy. I simply refused to play his game. If you own the patent, the lawyer said, his legal mind frantically trying to salvage the situation, the university would be willing to discuss a very generous licensing agreement. We can offer you your own laboratory. We can expedite your PhD defense. We can make you a principal investigator. They were doing exactly what Marcus had done. They were trying to buy my kingdom with scraps, assuming I needed their institutional validation to survive. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I am not interested in a university laboratory. The academic model is broken. I am taking my intellectual property to the private sector. I turned toward the door. Ms. Vance, the dean called out, desperation creeping into his voice. You are still a PhD candidate. If you walk out that door, we will not grant your doctorate. You will leave this university with nothing but a master's degree. I stopped. I looked back at him. Dean Harrington, I said softly, the global market for industrial plastic degradation is currently valued at roughly $40 billion. In the private sector, venture capital firms do not care about the letters behind my name. They care about the patent in my briefcase. You can keep the doctorate. I'll keep the enzyme. I walked out of the dean's office. I did not return to the biology laboratory. I walked out of the heavy glass doors of the science building, into the crisp morning air, and I never looked back. The fallout from the European Research Council hearing was cataclysmic for Marcus Vance. The university, desperate to save its remaining European funding, threw him entirely under the bus. He was stripped of his tenure and formally dismissed for gross academic misconduct. The ERC published a brief, devastating bulletin regarding the retracted grant, effectively blacklisting him from the global scientific community. He could not secure a teaching position at a community college, let alone a research university. Colin Hayes quietly deleted his association with Marcus from his LinkedIn profile and moved back to California. His post-doctoral dreams collateral damage in a war he hadn't understood. As for me, the transition was exactly as lucrative as I had mathematically modeled. I took my clean, uncompromised patent to a boutique venture capital firm in Boston, specializing in green biotechnology. They did not ask me for my publication history. They asked me to run a live demonstration of the degradation model. When the enzyme tore through the polyethylene sample in the petri dish exactly as my algorithm predicted, they wrote me a seed funding check for $5 million. I launched my own company. I hired my own research assistants. I built my own clean rooms. I paid my staff exceptional salaries. And I ensured that every single person who touched the data received co-authorship credit on the resulting publications. I built the exact opposite of Marcus Vance's laboratory. 2 years later, my company secured a massive government contract to deploy the enzyme in a series of highly polluted industrial waterways. The breakthrough made the front page of every major scientific journal in the world. The journals asked me for an interview. I sat in my spacious, sunlit office, looking out at the Boston skyline, and gave them the exact scientific details of the enzymatic pathway. I spoke about the chemistry, the computational models, and the future of the biosphere. I did not mention Marcus Vance. I did not mention the university. I erased them from the narrative completely, leaving them exactly where they belonged, in the absolute, irrelevant darkness of the footnotes. That is the whole story. Now here is what I want to leave you with. Institutions, whether they are academic, corporate, or familial, are heavily invested in the myth of the hierarchy. They teach you that the people at the top are uniquely qualified to be there, and that your only path to success is to hand them your brilliance and pray they reward you with a fraction of the credit. They rely on your fear. They rely on your belief that you cannot survive outside their walls. They tell you that without their approval, their titles, and their funding, you are nothing. It is the greatest lie ever sold. If you are the one generating the data, writing the code, or building the foundation, you hold the actual power. The people at the top are merely managing the optics. An institution is just a building. The true value is the intelligence inside your head. Do not let them intimidate you with their titles. Do not let them steal your life's work under the guise of teamwork. If they try to take your kingdom, do not beg them for a seat at the table. Quietly pack your briefcase. Ensure the paperwork is legally bulletproof, and then walk out the door, taking the absolute, undeniable foundation of their empire with you. Let them stand in an empty room, holding a title that suddenly means nothing, while you go build your own castle. Tell me in the comments your first name and your city. Tell me if you have ever handed an arrogant boss the rope they needed to hang themselves and walked away while they tied the knot. For more stories like this one, come find us on the channel. Every story here is about someone who refused to be a footnote in their own masterpiece and decided to become the author of their own justice. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.